today to do a couple things. I want to talk about the difference between the politic of the U.S. Congress and the Japanese Diet, and specifically the role of the Speaker and how the Speaker sets the paradigm or sets the program of both those, of the body of the especially the U.S. House of Representatives and, in a sense, the Senate itself, the whole Congress. I also wanted to then talk about how that affects some of the issues before the Congress itself. We have trade issues that we need to talk about, more specifically the TPP. We have nuclear issues, really focus on some of the things that are going on in Japan here, namely Fukushima, but how that affects the rest of the global view of the nuclear industry. We have issues in Washington itself, immigration issues and agricultural bills and all these things that are determined on whether the Congress can get legislation passed or if it can't, and how it impacts on other things that are waiting to be done in Congress. But first of all, I want to say I had some meetings this afternoon with some members of the Diet that I've known for a long, long time. And in the discussion, I said to them, sometimes as Speaker, I was very, very jealous of the ability that the power of the party has in the Japanese Diet, because the party in power is also the government in power. And contrary to what happens in the United States, we have a divided process of government. But many times I found myself as Speaker of the House with a voting margin of less than 5 votes. And any time out of 435 members, and your majority was 218 members, any time that you would have 5 people that would get up on the wrong side of the bed in the morning, or say something to the press when they were back in their district and said that they couldn't vote for this piece of legislation or that piece of legislation, you were at an impasse and you couldn't get anything done. Let's go back to the difference between the Diet and the House of Representatives. The Diet in the lower house certainly determines who the government will be. It determines who the ministers of government will be, and certainly determines who the Prime Minister is. The Prime Minister, of course, is the top of the government. That's very different in the Congress. The Congress leadership determines who the Speaker of the House will be. And the Speaker of the House, in a way, even though you have a president and an executive department in the U.S. Congress, the Speaker of the House is responsible for the political side of the House of Representatives. So in my term of Speaker, I made 1,000 campaign stops in the 8 years I was Speaker. So you're first of all, you're responsible for returning your members to Congress or getting new members elected so that you could be the majority. If you didn't do that, you did not have the majority and you were not in power. It also meant raising the money to make sure that your members had enough money to be able that they could get their message out and they could run a political campaign. The Speaker also had the control of all the control of all the legislation. So every piece of legislation that was moved through the House had to have 2 things. First of all, you had to make sure that you had the requisite number of votes, at least 218 votes, to pass that legislation. And then the Speaker had the sole power to decide what bills moved before the Congress and what bills stayed and did not move before the Congress. So the Speaker had a huge amount of power. A dynamic that happened in 2002 is called campaign finance reform. It passed through the Senate, was sponsored by Senator McCain and Senator Feingold, and it was a political consequence of the presidential election in 2000. In the state of South Carolina, the party of the Republican Party in South Carolina threw all its support and its money behind George W. Bush and beat McCain in that primary election. That primary election set the stage for the rest of that primary, and once Bush won South Carolina, he won basically the Republican nomination. I would say, in my view, Senator McCain was bitter, unhappy about that situation. So he wanted to change it. He wanted to take the money and the power out of the party. Now, the party, just like the LDP or the Komito or the Japanese Democratic Party, basically is a homogenizing process. They find out who the best candidates are. They support those candidates. They in the case of the Japanese diet, they slate those candidates, and they support those candidates by and large, and put the money in to make sure that they can get their message out. What the McCain-Feingold bill did in the U.S. Congress is take all the party money out of politics, and said the state party couldn't be supported by the federal party, the federal party couldn't support the state party. So it basically took money out, effectively out of the political parties. When you take the money out of the political parties, the money goes someplace. And until the federal government, the U.S. Political process, changes and actually does, again, a different type of campaign finance reform, or changes the law again. And once you have the law, it's very difficult to change it. Nobody likes to change the status quo, but you're going to have this situation exist. And one of the reasons I'm here this week, and I've been working with, we've been very, very privileged to work with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, is to try to improve the relationship between the U.S. Congress and the Japanese Diet. It's a very important relationship. I've been, the 20 years that I've worked in the Congress, I had a very good relationship, and we had a long relationship. And if you understand and have these relationships with members of Congress, with the Diet, and the Diet with the members of Congress, you carry on a dialogue, and you can begin to understand what the problems of one nation are, and you can start to understand a better working cooperation. For instance, let's talk today about some of the issues that are out there, even in commerce. The islands between Japan and China that affect North Korea, they affect Korea, they affect the Philippines, and if you go farther south, they affect Vietnam. If there is one thing, one gunboat and one fishing boat that has some kind of a conflict, it could affect the whole world trade. It could affect trade routes. It could affect commerce. It could affect the whole balance that we have militarily. And so we need to have the dialogues not only with Japan and the United States, but with other Pacific nations to make sure that we can have abilities so that these types of conflicts don't arise. Fukushima is important. It's important to the Japanese people to see Fukushima resolved in a very satisfactory way to get it cleaned up. If not, today, at one time, Japanese depended between 30 and 40% for its power supply from nuclear energy. Today, hardly any of the power, only 2 plants are actually running. And in all probability, even if the Abe government makes some important decisions, that probably at the top side, not more than 15 or 20% of Japan's power supply will ultimately come from nuclear energy. So what does that mean? It means that unless Fukushima is cleaned up satisfactorily, and it has the confidence of the Japanese people, that Japan will have a huge deficit in power. Japan's a country of industry. It's an industry of actually making things, of being able to be a merchant. And unless Japan has the power and the ability to do that, you need the energy to do it. If you don't have the energy to do it, you will continually see a lag in your economy. It also means that the issue of Fukushima is just not a Japanese issue, it's a global issue. It's a global issue because, for instance, in the United States, we're ready to build 2 or 3 new nuclear plants. I doubt, maybe they will be, but maybe they won't be. I doubt that they, unless there's a resolution of Fukushima, I doubt that those plants will ever get built. Why? Because there has to be a confidence that if there's a problem in nuclear energy, that the nuclear plants can be cleaned up. There can be a resolution. And it's important then that we look to Japan to see how the Japanese government, and hopefully we can cooperate in a world basis, and to find that type of cleanup. The third issue why Fukushima is so important is Japan has spent 30 years doing research when the United States has really kind of sat back and not done anything, but you've created Rokusho and other areas of nuclear research and how to deal with spent nuclear waste and cleanup. And really, Japan is on the forefront of selling its nuclear technology around the world. And unless Fukushima can be resolved on a satisfactory basis, that ability to sell that technology around the world certainly is stymied. Not many people will be building new nuclear energy plants. Another issue that's important with the United States and Japan is TPP. And again, that is tied to Fukushima in a sense, because I think Japan will increasingly depend on liquid LNG as a power supply. And you know, I've looked at all the new building in the United States for the last 30 years. It's all been natural gas, all new electric generation has been gas. I think the same thing will happen. But right now, Japan is tied in buying its gas at a very high price, tied to petroleum, to the Middle East. But if you can go on the free market, and we have an abundance of LNG, and we can export Japan LNG to Japan at a much lower cost, then that helps everybody, and it's certainly a benefit to Japan's energy supply. So these are just some of the things that are very important, that run together, that you can't separate. And so the dialogue between the Japanese Diet and the U.S. Congress and our government, both on the executive side and the Prime Minister side, is very important, because the relationship from Japan not only sets the stage for the economy between the United States and Japan, it also sets the stage for our defense capabilities. And of course, as we move more of our defense capability off of Japan's shores, and Japan picks up more of its own responsibility, we still have to have that cooperation. And as that, we need to have that type of confidence that we can talk to each other and have confidence in each other so that we can find good resolutions when there are problems. And the third side is if a strong Japan-U.S. relationship also brings stability to the whole Pacific Rim. And that's very important, because we're going to see continually threats out of China if things don't always go their way. And I know Japan has sometimes indigestion over our president being too close to the Chinese president. But really, the issue, the strong point of our cooperation is a strong relationship between the Japanese government and the U.S. government, and that brings stability to the whole region. Well, I would look at it. Number one is a U.S. press term, that would be China spin. Otherwise, China was probably trying to put its best face on that negotiation. That's my interpretation, certainly not an official government interpretation. But I think and I'm not being critical of our president, but I think the president needs to make a statement that he looks at this, that there needs to be diplomatic negotiations, that this is the way to go. If you give China too much room, and again, my opinion, they'll take advantage of it. And the only thing that we can constantly do is keep China engaged on an economic basis, and that keeps them at bay, at least on a military side. But I think a strong, as I said before, a strong Japanese, U.S. relationship also brings stability to the whole area. And that needs to be done, and I think it's a very important step that I hope that Secretary Kerry pursues.